My name is Emily. I'm 34 years old. And the day we buried our mother, I thought the hardest part would be saying goodbye. But I was wrong. The real shock came hours later when the lawyer opened the envelope and read the will. The house, the cabin, the savings, even the car our father rebuilt in the garage, all of it went to my brother, to the golden child, to the one who always knew how to smile at the right camera. And me? I got a line in the will that said, "At my brother's discretion." A polite way of saying, nothing. That night, after the condolences dried and the casseroles were stacked, my brother slid something into my palm. A folded bus ticket. One way. Atlanta. "Start fresh," he said, as if he were doing me a favor. I packed one suitcase. Clothes. A worn sweater. A pair of shoes. But I didn't leave empty-handed. I took copies of plats from the file cabinet. Easement notes tucked under loose papers. Old HOA letters. Mom's handwritten maps, and an old blue notebook with my high school doodles on the margins. On the cover, I wrote 2 words, "Plan ground." He thought the will buried me. He didn't know he had planted me. Before I go on, I want to ask you, have you ever been written off by your own family? Have you ever felt invisible, like the one you were supposed to quietly disappear? Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. If this hook grabbed you, hit subscribe, like the video, and ring the bell. There's more coming. This is the story of how being the spare became the sharpest weapon I ever held. I don't remember the first time I realized my brother and I lived in 2 different families under the same roof. Maybe it was at 6 years old, when my drawing of a horse got pinned to the fridge, only until Luke brought home a soccer trophy the next day. Or maybe it was when I was 9 and came home with a spelling bee ribbon, and Dad barely looked up from his newspaper. Meanwhile, when Luke scored a touchdown that same week, Mom organized a barbecue, complete with balloons in team colors. What I know is this: favoritism doesn't feel like a thunderstorm. It's not loud or sudden. It's a slow drip, a steady leaking that wears you down until you're hollow. Luke was 3 years older than me, and to the outside world, we were the perfect sibling pair. He was blonde in summer, tall for his age, with the easy grin of a boy who knew people would clap no matter what he did. And me? I was the dark-haired one with freckles, the cute little sister who tagged along at family reunions, invisible once the spotlight found him. Our parents didn't mean to draw the lines so clearly, but they did. For Luke, there were new cleats every season, the best science kits, a brand new bike when he turned 12. For me, there were hand-me-downs, clearance rack shoes, and Mom's favorite phrase, "Don't be difficult, Emily." We can't do everything. I didn't complain out loud. Complaints in our house turned into lectures about gratitude. But inside, I kept score. I remember one birthday more than the others. I was turning 10. I wanted a cake shaped like a book because I love to read more than anything. I even cut out a picture from a magazine and left it on the fridge as a hint. That year, Luke's baseball team made it to state finals. His birthday was a week before mine. He got a surprise party with 20 kids, a bounce house, and a cake the size of a table. When my day came, I blew out candles on a store-bought sheet cake, half chocolate, half vanilla, because that's easier. The frosting roses were already smudged from the box. I smiled for the pictures, because I had learned early that my real feelings didn't belong in photo albums. That night, when everyone was asleep, I tore the magazine picture into pieces. It wasn't just birthdays. It was how my achievements never counted unless they reflected on Luke. I brought home straight A's, and my father said, "See, Luke? She's studying so much. Why can't you try harder?" It wasn't praise. It was ammunition for him. When I got into the school choir, Mom said, "That's nice, Emily. Maybe you can sing at Luke's graduation one day." Everything about me was framed around him. I wasn't Emily. I was Luke's sister. There were moments I thought my father saw me. One night, when I was 13, I stayed up late reading by the hallway light. Dad walked past, paused, and asked what the book was about. His voice was softer than usual, like he'd forgotten who he was supposed to be. I told him. He nodded, sat down on the floor beside me, and listened for 5 whole minutes. Then Mom called from the kitchen, and he stood, shaking his head as if embarrassed by his lapse. The next day, it was as if that moment had never happened. By high school, Luke was the golden boy of our small town. Quarterback, honor roll, barely popular. Parents compared their sons to him. Teachers used him as an example. He wore the family pride like a Letterman jacket. And me? I became invisible in plain sight. I was the girl who carried trays for bake sales, who made flyers, who sat in the audience while he was on stage. I learned to make myself small because small didn't draw fire. But small doesn't mean weak. It means patient. I started noticing things no one else cared about. The way Mom filed property tax bills in a messy cabinet. The way Dad fought with the HOA about dock access. The language on signs that said private drive but didn't have enforcement codes. I didn't know why I paid attention, I just did. My brother collected trophies. I collected patterns. When I was 16, Luke got into a fender bender with Dad's old truck. He'd been drinking. Everyone knew it, but nobody said it. Dad fixed the truck. Mom smoothed things over with the neighbors, and Luke's punishment was a weekend volunteering at church. That same year, I missed curfew once because a friend's ride broke down. I came home 10 minutes late. Dad yelled until I cried. Mom grounded me for 2 weeks. The message was clear. Luke's mistakes were temporary. Mine were permanent. I think the deepest cut came the day Mom was diagnosed with cancer. Luke drove her to the first appointment, posed with her for a smiling picture, and posted it online with a caption about family strength. After that, it was me. I took her to chemo. I held her hair when she was sick. I washed dishes when she couldn't stand. I learned the schedule for her medications by heart. Luke stopped by on Sundays, stayed long enough for photos, and left before the hard hours began. But in our parents' eyes, he was the hero, the son who showed up. I told myself it didn't matter, that love was its own reward. But love without recognition wears down, like stone under rain. The last year of Mom's life, she hugged Luke more than me. She whispered things in his ear, plans and instructions. I sat on the other side of the couch, holding her cold hand, pretending not to notice. When she passed, the house felt like a stage with the spotlight fixed forever on him. And when Dad's heart gave out months later, there was no question who the will would favor. By then, I had stopped hoping. Looking back, I realized something. I was trained for invisibility. Trained to accept crumbs, to keep quiet, to let others speak over me. But invisibility is a dangerous gift. Because when no one is watching you, you're free to watch everything. For as long as I can remember, I dreamed of leaving. To live in a city where no one knew my last name, where I wasn't Luke's sister, where I could walk down a street without feeling like a shadow next to someone else's spotlight. In college, I circled apartments in classifieds, cut out pictures of small kitchens with cracked tiles and narrow windows. I imagined myself drinking coffee at a table no one else had sat at, opening mail addressed only to me. But when Mom got sick, I stayed. At first, I told myself it was temporary. She'd get through the first round of treatment, I'd help her until she was stronger, and then I'd go. But chemo blurred into surgery, surgery into recovery, recovery back into chemo. Seasons passed, and my plans folded smaller, tucked into a drawer with medical bills and pharmacy receipts. Every time I thought about sending resumes, I heard her voice calling from the bedroom, soft but urgent, and I stayed. I worked where I could, waitressing at a diner off the highway, filing invoices at a warehouse office for minimum wage, babysitting, tutoring neighborhood kids in math. Enough to keep gas in the car, groceries in the fridge, co-pays at the clinic. But never enough to build a future. I graduated with a degree, but no career. My diploma stayed in its envelope, leaning against the wall of my childhood bedroom, gathering dust. Meanwhile, Luke was always busy. He moved through town like a man already successful. He had suits pressed by the same tailor our father once used, business cards that read Strategic Development Consultant, and the easy confidence of someone who knew people would applaud no matter what he said. At family dinners, Dad leaned forward as Luke spoke about growth opportunities. Mom called him her visionary. They didn't understand his work, neither did I, but they didn't need to. His certainty was enough. I started noticing things, small cracks in the glossy surface. Sometimes I came home from my shift and found papers spread across the dining room table, forms with seals, dense text, places for signatures. Once, I saw Mom's shaky handwriting at the bottom of a page, letters uneven, almost childlike. Luke looked up with a smile when I asked. "Insurance renewals," he said smoothly. "Nothing for you to worry about." Another time, after Mom was gone, I caught him with Dad in the study. Dad sat slumped, his heart still weak from the attack. Luke slid a folder across the desk. "Just a formality," he murmured. I saw the title before Luke whisked the paper away. Transfer agreement. Dad's hand trembled as he signed, barely glancing at the words. I opened my mouth, but Luke's eyes cut to mine, calm, steady, dismissive. "Emily," he said softly, "you don't need to get involved. You're good with details. Let me handle the big picture." The big picture. Always his territory. Always too large for me. Life narrowed. My days became a loop. Drive to the hospital, wait in plastic chairs, guide Mom through halls that smelled of disinfectant, bring her home, cook bland meals she could keep down. At night, I worked shifts that left my feet aching, came home to stacks of bills, and lay awake listening to her cough through the walls. My 20s slipped through my fingers like water. Luke, meanwhile, was a presence and an absence at once. He stopped by with flowers for the nurses, took pictures with Mom, posted captions about family strength. People praised his devotion. They didn't see him leave before midnight fevers, before bathroom floors, before the nights when I sat by her bed wiping sweat from her face. The last year of her life, she leaned more and more toward him. She whispered in his ear, gave him instructions, plans. Sometimes I sat on the other side of the couch, holding her cold hand, pretending not to notice. It stung, but I told myself it was exhaustion, that she wanted to believe in the son who promised solutions, not the daughter who brought tea and tissues. When she died, I felt hollowed out. The house became a stage with one spotlight fixed squarely on him. Dad followed months later. His body, already fragile, seemed to give out once she was gone. He lasted just long enough to let Luke settle deeper into his role as the family's face. At the hospital, doctors spoke to Luke first, even when I was the one who stayed overnight, watching machines tick. At home, contractors came and left through Luke. I overheard fragments, title transfer, trusteeship, liquid assets. When I asked questions, Luke brushed them away with the same easy tone. "Emily, you've done so much. Let me carry this burden now." He made it sound generous, but I couldn't shake the image of his hand guiding Mom's signature, or Dad's pen scratching across pages he didn't understand. After the funerals, the silence in the house was unbearable. Lilies wilted in vases, the smell sweet and rotten at once. I wandered room to room, touching furniture, photographs, doorknobs, trying to feel the presence of parents who weren't there. In the study, I opened a drawer in Dad's desk and found a manila folder labeled Trust Agreement. Inside, nothing but a sticky note in Luke's handwriting. Filed. Filed where? Filed for whom? Later, while boxing up Mom's scarves, I found her journal. Most pages were lists, prayers, reminders. But in one, her handwriting trembled across the lines. "Luke says this will protect us." I don't understand, but I'm so tired. "I'll sign tomorrow." I stared at the words until they blurred. Protect us from what? From whom? At 24, I was standing on a cliff with no ground beneath me. No stable job, no savings, no parents. Just a shoebox of bills, a diploma still sealed in its envelope, and the weight of years spent waiting for a freedom that never came. And yet, despite the splinters of doubt, I clung to one fragile hope, the will. Surely, after all the years of caretaking, after every night I stayed awake so Mom could rest, after every appointment, every bill, every sacrifice, I would get something. A share of the house. A slice of savings. Enough to leave, to start over, to breathe. It didn't matter if Luke got the lion's share. He always did. I just needed a piece. Enough for a bus ticket, a deposit on a tiny apartment, a chance to finally begin the life I had imagined. But in the quiet of that empty house, a darker thought pressed against me. Maybe I was already erased. Maybe the signatures I'd glimpsed, the documents I wasn't allowed to read, had written me out long before the lawyer ever opened the folder. The morning of the will reading, the house felt colder than it ever had. Even with relatives milling through the kitchen, scraping plates and whispering condolences, the silence underneath was suffocating. Lilies from the funeral arrangements were already curling at the edges, their scent thick and sickly, clinging to every corner. I sat on the edge of the couch, staring at the cracked leather seam under my hand, waiting for something I couldn't name. A lawyer I had never met before sat across from me, a stiff woman with square glasses and a leather folder balanced on her lap. Above her head, my father's antler clock ticked in uneven rhythm, 2 beats sharp, 1 beat late. Luke stood near the fireplace, tall, composed, framed beneath the oil portrait of our grandfather, as if he belonged there by design. Neighbors and cousins crowded into the den, their voices hushed, their eyes starting between Luke and me. I knew what they saw. A confident man in his late 20s, a tailored suit, grief arranged neatly in the set of his jaw. And beside him, a younger woman with tired eyes, a plain sweater, and hands clasped so tightly in her lap they looked bloodless. The lawyer cleared her throat and opened the folder. "I will now read the last will and testament," she began. Her voice was steady, detached, as if she were reciting weather reports. I braced myself for disappointment, but I wasn't ready for erasure. The family home, including furnishings, is bequeathed to the eldest son. Luke inclined his head, solemn as though he were accepting a crown. The lake cabin, brokerage accounts, and associated vehicles are also bequeathed to the eldest son. The words struck like stones. Also, as if everything naturally followed him, Mom's convertible, Dad's old truck, the savings they had scraped together over years. Each memory I held of them, already his. The lawyer continued without pause. And finally, a scholarship fund to be administered at the discretion of the eldest son in support of promising young talent. That was it. The last line. A scholarship fund. Not for me, not even in my name, but for strangers Luke would one day choose. My heart hammered, desperate for a loophole. Surely there was more. Some acknowledgement of the years I had given up. A small share. A sentence that said, "And to my daughter, who stayed when no one else did." But nothing came. The air thickened around me. My throat ached as I forced words out. So, nothing. The lawyer blinked at me as if I had spoken out of turn. "Your parents indicated that your brother would best understand the family's priorities." Gasps and murmurs rolled through the room. Cousins whispered, "Well, that's tradition." A neighbor muttered, "It's only fair." Heads nodded, as though the son inheriting everything was not only expected but righteous. I looked at Luke, waiting for a flicker of guilt, a protest, some acknowledgement that this was wrong. But his face was carved from stone, eyes fixed forward, expression perfectly balanced between grief and dignity. Inside me, rage coiled. I wanted to scream, to rip the papers from the lawyer's hands, to shout that I had bathed Mom, carried her up the stairs, sat through nights of fevers while Luke took pictures and left. But my body betrayed me. I sat still, silent, as if invisibility had hardened into my bones. Luke placed his hand on my shoulder, for the benefit of everyone watching. His palm was steady, rehearsed. He squeezed just enough for me to feel the warning beneath the performance. When the lawyer closed her folder, the sound echoed like a door slamming shut. Afterward, the guests filed out, plates of cold food wrapped in foil, murmuring empty kindness. The house shrank with every departing footstep until it was just me, Luke, and the faint hum of the refrigerator. He turned to me, smiling with practiced softness. "You always said you wanted out of this town," he murmured. Then he slipped something into my palm. A folded ticket. Greyhound. One way. Atlanta. I stared at it, the paper damp where his thumb pressed down. "Start fresh," he added, his tone light, generous, but his eyes glittered with something darker. This wasn't kindness. It was exile. That night, I went upstairs to the bedroom that no longer felt like mine. The closet still smelled of my mother's perfume, faint but lingering. The dresser drawers groaned with the weight of forgotten sweaters. I pulled out a small suitcase, filled it with 2 pairs of jeans, a sweater, a toothbrush. It looked pitiful, like a child's overnight bag. But I didn't leave empty-handed. From the study, I gathered what Luke had overlooked or dismissed. Copies of plats, HOA letters, easement notes, old maps in Mom's handwriting, ink faded but still legible. Documents no one cared about, no one but me. I placed them in an old shoebox with my spiral-bound notebook from high school. The blue cover was frayed, doodles scrawled in the margins. On the front, I pressed the tip of my pen and wrote 2 words, plan ground. When I zipped the suitcase shut, a strange calm washed over me. He thought this will had buried me. He didn't know it had planted me. The next morning, Luke drove me to the bus station. He hummed along to the radio, tapping the steering wheel, while I stared at my reflection in the window. A woman small and silent, but sharper than she had ever been. When he pulled my bag from the trunk, he leaned close. "Don't come back," he whispered, "unless you're ready to clap for me." I didn't answer. The bus driver called, the engine roared, and I stepped inside. I sat in the back, the shoebox wedged under my feet, the folded ticket heavy in my pocket. As the town rolled away, the promise formed in me like stone. If I ever came back, it wouldn't be to applaud. It would be to claim. When the bus pulled away from my hometown, I had little more than a suitcase, a shoebox of family papers, and a degree that felt useless. I'd graduated in land management, courses full of zoning codes, environmental surveys, and the dry language of plats and easements. I'd once imagined myself working at a planning office, drawing maps, helping decide where roads and parks would go. That dream had ended in the long years of caring for Mom, then Dad, and the small jobs I'd taken just to keep food in the fridge. So when I arrived in the city at 24, diploma in hand but no work history, I was already behind. The first months were survival. I rented a room above a laundromat where the walls smelled of detergent and steam. I worked nights at a diner, the kind where the neon never shut off and my feet ached from carrying plates until dawn. During the day, I went from office to office with my resume, but interviews stalled the moment they saw the gaps in my experience. "You've been out of the field too long," one manager said. "We're looking for recent grads." Another smiled politely. "Your coursework is impressive, but we need someone with practical experience." The irony stung. I had spent years navigating hospital forms, insurance claims, and legal notices for my parents. I knew bureaucracy more intimately than half the people interviewing me. But to them, I was just another woman with no references. So I took what I could, temp jobs, filing papers, answering phones, scanning documents. It was enough to pay rent, not enough to feel like progress. At night, in that cramped room, I opened the shoebox. Inside were plots, HOA letters, easement notes, and Mom's hand-drawn maps. At first, I looked at them for comfort, proof that my parents had existed, that I had mattered in their story, however small. But soon I began to see something else, gaps. An easement note marked differently in 2 documents. A property line that shifted by a few feet between surveys. Tax records that didn't match. Little cracks in the paperwork that reminded me of my college lectures. Professors warning that land was never as clean on paper as it looked on a map. The knowledge stirred something in me. I wasn't useless. I hadn't wasted those years in classrooms. I could see what others overlooked. I began haunting the public library, pulling dusty zoning manuals and real estate law handbooks from the shelves. I visited the county recorder's office on my days off, asking clerks to show me how files were indexed. At first, they were annoyed, then amused, then resigned to my questions. Eventually, one older clerk admitted, "Most people don't care enough to notice half this stuff." "You've got an eye." That gave me fuel. I saved every extra dollar, stashing it in envelopes marked future. My meals were cheap, my clothes secondhand, my nights lonely, but my notebook filled with notes, potential loopholes, recorded restrictions, tax liens. Plan ground became less of a title and more of a map. By the second year, I managed to get hired as a junior clerk at a small title company. The pay was modest, but it gave me access to records, to real deeds and plats, to the living machinery of land ownership. I learned to trace chains of title backward a century, to identify encumbrances buried in legal jargon, to spot when a surveyor's measurements didn't align. Most of my colleagues skinned. I read deeply. For me, it wasn't just paperwork. It was training. With my first real savings, I bought a tiny parcel, no bigger than a backyard, at a tax auction. No one wanted it. It was considered worthless. But when I overlaid the maps, I realized the land cut across a proposed road extension. Small as it was, it mattered. When the city finally came knocking, they had to negotiate. I didn't demand much, just fair payment and a clause that required them to repair drainage on the adjacent ditch. It was the first time I saw the power of being in the way legally and deliberately. I celebrated that night with a real meal, takeout from a restaurant I couldn't normally afford, eaten straight from the carton on my bed. It tasted like victory. From then on, I looked for edges no one else wanted. A sliver of land beside a warehouse. An abandoned easement no one had filed properly. A neglected parcel with taxes in arrears. I bought them under small LLCs, paying cash, keeping my name out of the spotlight. Developers hated me, but they paid. Each negotiation added another brick to the foundation I was building. I learned to hire surveyors for quick consultations, to bring lawyers in for airtight agreements. I never fought in court. I didn't have the money for that, but I structured deals so that settling with me was always cheaper than resisting. Years passed in this rhythm. Work, save, study, buy. My wardrobe improved one jacket at a time. My apartment grew from a room above a laundromat to a one-bedroom in a quiet block. People at the title company began to respect me, calling me when they hit a confusing clause or an old plat. I still wasn't flashy. I stayed small, quiet, patient. But my portfolio grew. By the 7th year, I controlled enough slivers and corners that people began to whisper. Who owns all these? They asked in boardrooms. Why do we need her signature? I smiled when I heard. Because my name wasn't always on the deeds. My entities were discreet. But the truth was clear. I was no longer invisible. Through it all, Luke thrived in public. He expanded his business, shook hands at ribbon cuttings, appeared in newspapers. To outsiders, he was still the golden son. But behind his shine, I saw the cracks. Some of his developments ran into trouble. Permits delayed. Costs ballooned. Roads stalled because of access disputes. And sometimes, quietly, my lawyer's name appeared on his desk. A signature he needed. An agreement he couldn't bypass. I never reached out. Not yet. Patience was my greatest inheritance. 10 years after the bus carried me away, I stood in my own office, a modest one, but with my name on the lease. My shoebox of papers had become rows of labeled binders. My notebook, plan ground, was filled with check marks beside goals I once thought impossible. I wasn't the girl begging for scraps anymore. I was the woman who could tilt projects, delay developers, shift money with the stroke of a pen. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't waiting for recognition. I was ready to make him see. When I stepped off the train, the air smelled the same dust and cut grass and the faint sweetness of the river, but the town itself was different. 10 years had sharpened its edges. There were new office parks on the outskirts, new storefronts on Main Street, and a gleaming glass building downtown with my brother's name embossed on the side in silver letters. The people passing on the sidewalk craned their necks at it, proud of the local boy who had made it big. From the outside, Luke's world was larger than ever. But I knew better. I had been patient. I had been quiet. And in the silence, I had built something stronger than applause. I wasn't the girl with smudged birthday cakes anymore. I wasn't the invisible daughter sitting on the edge of couches. I was 34 now, and in my portfolio were deeds, rights of way, and easements that wrapped around this town like a net. And the glass tower with his logo? It stood on ground I owned. I didn't ask for a meeting. I summoned him. When Luke walked into the conference room, he carried himself the same way he had at 27, shoulders back, smile smooth, a man who assumed every chair belonged to him. But when his eyes met mine, I saw the flicker of something he had never shown me before. Uncertainty. Emily, he said, like my name was a surprise, a question, maybe even a warning. I gestured to the seat across from me. You've built quite an empire, I said calmly. But you've built it on my ground. He laughed, short and sharp. Don't be dramatic. You own a few scraps. Irrelevant. Scraps, I repeated, sliding a folder across the table. Inside were plats, tax records, and deeds, my web of acquisitions. Access roads. Drainage rights. Utility easements. 90% of your supply routes pass through land I control. 90%, Luke. He flipped through the pages, his smile thinning. I can complicate your business with a single notice, I continued. I can delay permits, block access, file suits that will bleed you dry. Or I can make things very simple. The choice is yours. His jaw tightened. What the hell do you want, Emily? I leaned forward. This was the moment I had waited a decade for. The truth, I said. I want the truth about what happened with the will. About the documents you slid in front of Mom when she was too tired to read. About the agreements you told Dad were just formalities. I want to hear it from you. Not my suspicions. Not my guesses. The truth. His laugh was bitter now. You really think I'd give you that? You've spent your life resenting me, and now you want a confession? Why? For closure. I didn't blink. For proof. You're going to tell me how you stole everything. And in exchange, I'll give you what you can't buy, peace. I'll keep my grip loose enough for your company to keep breathing. He stared at me, weighing. For the first time, I saw him cornered, not in public, not in front of cameras, but here, privately, where no mask would help him. Or, I added softly, I can file this morning. I can start a war you can't afford. For a long moment, he was silent. His fingers drummed against the folder, faster and faster. Then he leaned back and exhaled, a hiss of surrender. You always were stubborn, he muttered. Fine. You want the truth? Here it is. His voice lowered, the words spilling like poison he'd kept corked for a decade. I drafted the will. Not the lawyer. Me. I copied templates, doctored documents, made sure the signatures looked tired enough to be believable. Dad barely read anything by the end. He trusted me. Mom just wanted it off her desk. And when it was done, when the papers said everything belonged to me, I locked it in place before they were cold in the ground. My stomach twisted, but I stayed still. And the real will? I asked. He smirked, almost proud. The real one split everything. Half to me, half to you. Equal. Fair. But fair never gets you ahead. Fair never builds empires. I should have screamed. I should have thrown the chair through the glass wall of the conference room. But all I did was sit there, my hands folded neatly, my face unreadable. Inside, though, something broke and healed all at once. All those years of doubt, of wondering if my parents had erased me by choice, washed away. They hadn't cut me out. He had. The brother who smiled in photographs, who gave me a bus ticket instead of a share of my life. He had stolen it, line by line, signature by signature. I looked at him, really looked, and for the first time I didn't see the golden air. I saw a thief dressed in expensive fabric, terrified of losing what wasn't his. You finally said it, I whispered. You finally admitted it. He slammed his palm on the table. And what now? You want me to hand it all over? You want to destroy me? I leaned back, calm. I don't need to destroy you. I just need you to remember your empire stands because I allow it. You will run it under my shadow with my oversight. Call it partnership. Call it penance. But from now on, every deal you make, every road you pave, every building you raise, it's because I haven't pulled the rug out. His eyes burned with hatred. You'd make yourself my jailer? No, I said, standing. I'm just making sure you never steal from me again. The silence stretched as we stared at each other across the table, the golden sun and the invisible daughter, no longer roles, but adversaries. He had stolen a decade of my life, but I had stolen the ground beneath his feet. At last, he looked away. That was my victory. When I left the building, sunlight caught the glass letters of his name on the tower. For years, that name had loomed over me, heavy and suffocating. Now it looked different, fragile, like something that could be peeled off with time and patience. In my bag, the old blue notebook rested, its cover worn, its pages full. Plan ground. I had written those words when I was 24, sitting on a bed with a bus ticket in my hand and a heart full of nothing but anger. Now, at 34, I closed the notebook for the last time. The plan was complete. And I walked away, not with applause, not with fanfare, but with something stronger: the truth, the power, and the knowledge that the ground itself was mine.